What's going on, guys? So last week I did a tier list ranking of every single Wes Craven movie, and I had a lot of fun doing it, and I got a lot of good reception back from you guys for it. So I figured I would do another director tier list and rank all of their films. And I thought, I wanted to pick a director that I've seen pretty much all of their movies, as well as a director that would have made sense for videos that I put out on this channel in the past. And so immediately I thought of Sam Raimi, who of course made the Evil Dead trilogy, which Evil Dead is arguably my favorite horror franchise of all time, as well as a bunch of other movies that I love. So he was the guy that I figured would be the next best pick in order to do a director tier list on this channel. So we're going to go here with the categories. We have masterpiece. These are movies that I think are just 10 out of 10. I think that they are perfection. There's nothing really bad about them. And if there are, it's just very minuscule, nitpicky kind of things. But overall, pretty much a perfect movie. We have great movie where, okay, maybe it's not a masterpiece, but it's still a good, great, enjoyable film. We have decent where, yeah, there's plenty of flaws, but overall it's still an enjoyable watch. Maybe not, the greatest thing in the world, but pretty decent. And then we have the category, which is pretty much movies that overall not that great. Maybe they have their place somewhere, but not particularly for me. Just kind of, And then the final category, which I actually don't think there's going to be any in the ass category, but ass is just bottom of the barrel. Like, this movie is ass, like, not good, just it should be thrown in the trash, just not a good movie whatsoever. And then, of course, I have the have not seen category, of which there's only going to be one movie on this list that I'll throw in there, but that is the general layout of how we're going to work this. I'm also not counting the early short film kind of stuff that he made before The Evil Dead, like Within the Woods, and the stuff that he did to get financing in order to make The Evil Dead. We're going to start with Evil Dead being his first official film in his filmography. So that's how we're going to run it. And of course, this is just my subjective list. This is not meant to be a list saying this is the correct order in which you should view all of Sam Raimi's films. This is just my personal favorite list for my personal reasons, okay? So starting right off, if you know me, and if you know this channel, you know exactly where this movie is going to go. The Evil Dead, the original Evil Dead film, is my personal favorite horror movie of all time. I love this film so much for many different reasons. The film itself, yes, but also a lot of the behind the scenes aspects of the movie that I feel very emotionally tied to, because it's one of those movies that really inspired me to start trying to create my own things. Like, I made a horror movie when I was in high school with my friends that was like 90% just an Evil Dead ripoff, and it's what made me want to do it. I love the idea of how he made it too, that he just made it like with his friends, very small cast. It's just a bunch of kids. He was like 21 years old when he made this movie, which is amazing to me, just absolutely incredible, where they just literally went out into the middle of the woods at some ranky, like falling apart cabin and just tried to make the scariest movie that they could. They didn't have the best effects. They didn't have the best acting. They had a pretty basic generic script. You go into a weird cabin, you find some strange book, you read from it, you raise demonic creatures from from the hellscapes that possess your friends, and now you have to kill your friends that are possessed by demons by bodily dismemberment, making it as gory and ridiculous and over the top as possible. And I just love that. I love that the torturous aspects of them making it, how they didn't have showers. They didn't have anything. They had to put those giant contact lenses in their eyes. Bruce Campbell like broke his ankle while they filmed the movie. So I love all of those behind the scene facts. And it's just really inspiring that, we just wanted to go out there and we just wanted to make the scariest movie that we could. Now, I know nowadays, the effects are dated, and maybe a lot of people view the stuff in the first Evil Dead to be really cheesy and corny and kind of view it more as a comedy, whereas the Evil Dead franchise became more of a comedy as it went on. But the original film, they set out to make a legitimate horror film. It's only kind of the campiness and the cheesiness of it that, people view more as a comedy. But for me, I look at that movie and I just see incredible work. I love when directors don't have much to work with, and they're really just doing the best they can with what they have. And I do think the movie itself also does have some genuinely terrifying sequences. I mean, the tree scene, terrifying, to think about from multiple different ways. The scene where Cheryl is in the little basement compartment and she's like banging on the basement thing, like that's terrifying to me. When Ash's girlfriend gets possessed and she's just like singing that little song while everyone's dying and she's just like, we're gonna. It's just like, it's so good, man. Like I love this film so much. I can watch it over and over again. By far my favorite horror film of all time for all of those reasons and more. I just think it's a ton of fun. So, Sam Raimi's next movie, Crime Wave. Okay, so I have only seen this once. It was a very long time ago. The only reason I watched it was because it was a Sam Raimi movie, and that's the only reason why I would ever think about it or watch it again, because admittedly, it's not really that good. It is, it's got like a Three Stooges style humor to it, which of course Sam Raimi has in a bunch of his other movies like Evil Dead 2 and Army of Darkness that we'll get to, but something about it just doesn't quite work, and it feels a little bit more like a first time, filmmaker that is a little bit out of his element, where Evil Dead feels like Sam Raimi is just, he's on point, he's in his element. Like, I have total control over what I'm doing and I'm doing it well. Whereas Crime Wave just feels like he's not quite there yet. There might be a little too much here for him to handle at the time. The humor works for some people. I haven't seen it in a really long time. So to be fair, I'm mostly probably talking out my ass because I only watched it one time. So, but like it didn't work for me and I had zero interest to ever watch it again. I wouldn't go so far as to say that it's ass because, you could see that he's trying and, it's, the humor might work for some people. But for me, I'm just going to put it in the category because I have no desire to ever watch this again. It's just kind of an for me. But after that, they went back to what they knew best, which was the Evil Dead universe, and did Evil Dead 2, which to many people is the best Evil Dead movie, and I can't really argue with that. My personal favorite is the original, but Evil Dead 2 is where most people really get on board with the franchise, whereas the first one, some people think that it's just a little bit too, it tries to be a little bit too serious for what it is, whereas Evil Dead 2 kind of plays into the over-the-top nature of Sam Raimi's style and a little bit more of that wackiness, a little bit more of that Three Stooges style humor. You have, when Ash has his hand possessed and he's beating the shit out of himself. It also goes into more exaggerated territory because this is the movie where Ash cuts off his hand and like shoves the chainsaw onto his hand, kind of creates the version of Ash that I think that most people are familiar with now, because in the first movie, Ash is just like terrified most of the film, and then he's like barely fighting back as he's, trying to deal with all the trauma around him. Whereas Evil Dead 2 is Ash kind of hitting his breaking point, getting pissed off, and then fighting back against the demonic creatures a little bit more aggressively, right? Evil Dead 2 is also just batshit insane for the entire runtime. I mean, the first movie kind of is too, but at least it has about 15 minutes of setup. Evil Dead 2 has maybe 4 minutes of setup that is just a recap of the first movie, and then it just goes into full-blown insanity. You get crazy shit in this movie like Henrietta, and then you get the manifestation of the evil of the Necronomicon into the giant, Kandarian demon tree thing at the end. So we're getting even more wild in this film. And from what I was doing behind-the-scenes research, apparently Sam Raimi wanted to do the Medieval Dead at this point, but didn't really have the budget or the resources to do it. So Evil Dead 2 was definitely also made as a bridge to get to do the medieval style movie that he would eventually do in Army of Darkness. But there's really nothing bad to say about Evil Dead 2. I love it just as much as everyone else does. Just for me personally, the original is my favorite, but I would still consider Evil Dead 2 to be a masterpiece. So I will put them side by side in the masterpiece category. Next we have Darkman, which is a really fun movie. It's ridiculous. It's a little bit of Kind of a superhero horror movie because it's Sam Raimi's own original story. There's a couple of other writers on the movie too, but essentially Liam Neeson is the main character, and he gets burned up and he gets attacked by these gangsters and stuff, and so he comes back for vengeance after this kind of experimentation, and he has this tendency towards aggression and violence. He has the increased strength and all that kind of stuff, and he wears bandages, so he has that sort of like tortured character look to him, with the trench coat and the bandages and the hat. He has that signature style. He also wears different masks that can perfectly recreate other people's faces. So, you have him kind of being able to disguise himself as various different characters. There's a bunch of Sam Raimi intensity in this movie as far as his camera work goes, and his like quick cutting, and it's just kind of like crazy backgrounds that he puts behind the characters as they're going insane. It's got a lot of weird shit in it. It's kind of like a Jekyll and Hyde story as well. But it came out in that time, like around the the Tim Burton Batman era, where like superhero movies weren't really what they are today. And you could argue if Darkman is even technically considered a superhero movie or not, but it's absolutely a Sam Raimi movie. Like, his style is all over this thing, and it's a really fun ride. I've never seen the sequels. He didn't direct the sequels, but I've never seen them. But Darkman, the original, is really good. I'm gonna say that Darkman is a great movie. I think it works for me. I think it's a lot of fun. I haven't seen it in a very, very long time, but every time I think about it, I think about like just random scenes, like the elephant, and it just puts me in a good mood.
Take it down. Take it. Take the fucking elephant.
So now we start to see a trend here where Sam Raimi went and he made an Evil Dead movie. Then he made a different movie. Then he made another Evil Dead movie, another different movie, and now finally another Evil Dead movie with Army of Darkness wrapping up the trilogy. Unfortunately, the last Evil Dead movie that he would direct, but he did direct an episode of the TV show, which is great. But anyways, Army of Darkness. So this one is a little bit more difficult because it so drastically changes the style of the Evil Dead franchise, where Evil Dead 1 and 2 are still pretty based in the horror genre, even though Evil Dead 2 gets very silly. But Army of Darkness is straight up just a comedy. It's a comedy that has some horror elements and action elements. It's the medieval movie that he always wanted to make. Ash gets sent back in time. Demons and deadites are kind of running amok, and he has to go on this mission. He completely fucks it up. And this is also Ash as defined as the Ash character, ever really gets, until Ash vs. Evil Dead, the TV show, where he is just kind of this dumbass, kind of guy that he just wants to get home. He doesn't give a shit about what's going on. He's the reluctant hero. He's constantly making mistakes. He's constantly making excuses for himself. But at the same time, he's still a badass and he's still getting shit done. Army of Darkness is also interesting because it is the first movie of the Evil Dead franchise that I ever saw, because it is the most popular. I think I saw a stat once that said, like 80% of moviegoers have seen Army of Darkness, but it gets like 10% have seen the original Evil Dead. So Army of Darkness is a pretty popular one, I gotta say. A lot of people love it. A lot of people would put it as their favorite Evil Dead movie. I definitely wouldn't. I do think it's a great movie, and I do like it above Darkman. But again, this is a biased list because I'm a huge Evil Dead fan. But I can't quite put it in masterpiece. I don't think it quite hits the level of the first two for me. I think it is a little bit too much of a departure, maybe a little bit too much humor for me. And it does get rid of a lot of the darker elements. Like, there's not really any gore in the movie. There's not as much intensity when it comes to the scares and stuff. So it's pretty much it's a movie that pretty much anybody could watch, and that kind of brings it down a little bit, whereas the first two Evil Deads are very niche. But again, none of this is to say that I don't love Army of Darkness. I absolutely do. I just don't like it as much as the first two Evil Dead movies. Okay, so after this point in his career, it seems like he went in a very different direction for quite a while. He made a lot of movies in the 90s, starting with Darkman. I think Darkman was 1990. but then Army of Darkness, and then the next 4 films too. So he made 6 movies in 10 years, which is kind of crazy, especially when you consider how long it's been since he's made a movie now. But the 90s run has a lot of variety in it, which I definitely enjoy. And I like directors that can kind of, as much as I appreciate directors that kind of stay within their lane and are, perfect in that lane, I also like when directors step out of their lane and branch out into different genres to see what they could do. I think it's good for their creativity, and also you get unexpected gems when they do that. For Sam Raimi, the first one he did was The Quick and the Dead, which is a Western that is still very steeped in his style. There's a lot of quick draw. There's like a quick draw tournament in it with Gene Hackman and a young Leonardo DiCaprio, which is great. Like right before DiCaprio's career popped off, with Titanic and everything. Quick and the Dead, that's the one he was in first. I think it's a pretty enjoyable Western, and what you guys may or may not know about me is I actually am a pretty big Western fan. I never really talk about them on the channel, but my dad used to watch a lot of Westerns and stuff, and so I just I associate the aesthetic and the genre sort of like with childhood in a way. So Quick and the Dead is really good, I'm gonna say it's a you know what, we'll put it in the great movie category. I think it's pretty good. It's not a masterpiece, but I think it's pretty damn good. The next one, though, this one is this is the one I really want to talk about. So this is A Simple Plan. And I will say that I think, I said this in my Evil Dead retrospective too when we talked about Sam Raimi's career, but I seriously think that A Simple Plan is one of the most underrated movies of all time. And I feel like it's one of those movies that have gotten lost to time, where I don't know where it's streaming, but you can't find physical media of it anywhere. I am lucky enough to have a DVD copy of it, but it's like a very old, early DVD. Like, this movie never really got out there like that. But this is a suspense film. It's not a horror film, but it's deeply unnerving and will have you on the edge of your seat. It's basically about a bunch of characters, 3 characters in particular, that find a crashed plane in the middle of the woods, and there's a shit ton of money in the plane. And so they decide, they come up with a plan, and they decide to sit on the money for a while to make sure nobody talks about it, nobody suspects them, anything like that, and then they'll split the money 3 ways and, go their separate ways, right? But of course, things get much more complicated than that. There's greed, there is murders that happen, there is the danger of being caught, also, confliction in between the characters themselves, how they're going to handle this, and things just continue to escalate from bad to worse to even worse than that. And by the end of the movie, like, it seriously becomes so suspenseful that you won't expect some of the things that happen in this movie. I just never hear anybody talk about it anymore, and I think that that's true with a lot of these 80s, 90s, 2000s, lower budget suspense movies, that they just kind of get lost to time. Now that we don't have video stores, now if something's not on streaming, nobody knows about it, nobody sees it, and it's a shame because a lot of these movies are really great, and A Simple Plan, I think, is one of the best. I'm going to put it in a great movie, and I'm going to put it above Army of Darkness. I really love this movie. I really, really do, and I definitely encourage people to go seek it out and try to find somewhere to watch it. So the next one is the one that I have not seen. So this is For the Love of the Game, which is a sports baseball movie, which explains why I have not seen it, because I'm not really a sports guy whatsoever. And the very few sports movies that I do enjoy are usually around like combat sports, so I've never seen For the Love of the Game. I've heard that it's good. I've heard that it's very solid. I heard that it's a pretty emotional movie. It focuses a lot on relationships and stuff, which is interesting for Sam Raimi as well. But it is the only one here that I can't really comment on. I've just heard that it's pretty good. The next one is called The Gift, which is another suspense movie from the 2000s. Really great cast. Cate Blanchett and Keanu Reeves, all right, who is one of my favorite actors of all time, plays an absolute asshole in this movie. which is great because you're so used to seeing Keanu Reeves as like a badass or a hero or something. I love him being a villain, you know, or being like a piece of shit person. So that's what you get in The Gift. It's a kind of a supernatural thriller where she has visions of a murder that happens and they're trying to solve the murder and stuff like that. It's all right. Again, it's one of those movies that I've seen like one time and I thought it was enjoyable, but probably once again, if it were not Sam Raimi, I probably wouldn't have sought it out when I did. I think it's enjoyable for the runtime that it is, but it doesn't really give you anything too special about it, you know, beyond just some pretty good acting. I think Sam Raimi is very restrained in this movie. I'm going to put it indecent because he doesn't do a lot of his traditional camera work or kinetic energy with the camera and strange shots and compositions that he does in his other films. And it kind of feels like he definitely held back, you know, some of his style and flair. And whether he did that because of the studios that he was working with or whatnot, I'm not sure. But I think that because of that, it feels a little bit more tame than it should. If he had, you know, doubled down into a little bit more of the horror or a little bit more intensity in the movie, giving us a little bit of Evil Dead flavor in it, I think that it would have been a little bit more memorable. Whereas now it's just like, yeah, that was a good suspense thriller of the 2000s. Okay, but now we are going to get into probably a lot of people's favorites, the Spider-Man trilogy, the Sam Raimi Spider-Man trilogy with Tobey Maguire 1, 2, and 3. So let's get into it right here. I'm sure a lot of the points that you hear about Spider-Man have been talked about in every other video on YouTube, so I don't really need to go too in-depth into it. Just know that Sam Raimi grew up a big, you know, comic book fan, a big nerd. The dude's a big nerd, which is why I love him. And so this was a dream come true. He definitely added a lot of the 60s, like early style Spider-Man stuff into the movies. So because of that, some people consider it to be a little bit too cheesy, a little bit too campy, and that it doesn't hold up to today. However, because that was the era that I grew up in, you know, the first movie came out, I remember I was 12 years old, and I was so stoked because my parents allowed me to walk to the movie theater by myself, which was across town. And so since I was allowed to do that, I went and saw the first Spider-Man movie like 4 times in the theaters, and I was so stoked. It came out at the perfect time for me. Obviously, because of my age, Tobey Maguire is my Spider-Man. And so it's my favorite era of the Spider-Man movies. And so the first one, I'm going to say, because I really do try to reserve the top spot, the masterpiece spot. I don't want to throw too many movies in there because I want it to be very, very special. I'm a little bit teetering on the edge of the first Spider-Man because of what it was able to accomplish. Because at the time, you know, superhero movies were not what they are today. They weren't a dime a dozen. You weren't getting like 12 superhero movies every single year. This was a big event. And the fact that it actually worked, that Spider-Man, although always popular, you know, wasn't foolproof in the movies. We've had Superman, we had Batman, but Spider-Man was a little bit of a risk back in the day. And the fact that, you know, Sam Raimi was able to throw a lot of his style into it, a lot of the really intense camera work that helped for the web slinging scenes. There's a good mix of practical effects and CGI, and also just a very memorable movie. So, you know, I want to say, am I being too biased if I put it in masterpiece? I think, you know what? Fuck it. All right, fuck it. It's in masterpiece. It's great. It's great. Willem Dafoe as the Green Goblin. Come on. And then the next one too. I already knew I was going to put this one up there. I didn't know I was going to put the first Spider-Man when I did this list. But now that I'm thinking about it, I'm like, you know, for the legacy of it and what it was able to do and how it proved that superhero movies could be awesome, you know, whatever. It's masterpiece. But Spider-Man 2 is going to go even higher than that. I'm not going to put it above Evil Dead 1 and 2 because that's more my style, is the horror stuff. But I think Spider-Man 2 is not just the best Spider-Man movie, not just in Sam Raimi's trilogy, but in all of the Spider-Man movies. I also would still, to this day, probably put it in my top 5 comic book movies of all time. I do think it lives up to the hype. I do think it is legitimately a masterpiece. because it pushes everything that the first movie did further, where Peter Parker is just having the worst time ever. Everything in his life is falling apart, and he's trying to do the superhero thing, but he has no appreciation whatsoever. Nobody knows at that point. You know, things with Mary Jane are just beyond repair. Harry hates him. He's starting to lose his powers. Like, everything, so he's broke as shit. Like, everything sucks, you know? And I think that the way that it's done in this movie with Spider-Man, because that's a thing for the Spider-Man character, like he's supposed to be like an average person, an everyman, right? But I think this movie somehow is able to capitalize on it better than any other Spider-Man movie has been able to. And maybe it's because it's the first time we really saw it, but I don't think the Andrew Garfield, I don't think the Tom Holland Spider-Mans, I don't think any of them have really gotten into as much, you know, emotion and despair as the Tobey Maguire Spider-Mans do, that make me really give a shit about the characters. And that's the thing, is like, I was actually emotionally invested in these movies, and I never have been in the other Spider-Man movies. Not to mention the fucking action scenes in this movie. Like, the train sequence, again, you know, everyone always talks about it, but holy shit, the train fight scene in Spider-Man 2, still fucking top-notch. This movie's 20 years old, you know? Still top-notch, top-tier superhero fight scene. Incredible. You know, I remember when this movie ended, I could not wait until Spider-Man 3, you know? And I haven't had that feeling about a superhero movie forever. Maybe, like, the first Avengers was, like, the first time I was like, you know, oh my god, I can't wait to see what they do next. And then now we live in current MCU land. But before we get there, we gotta talk about Spider-Man 3. Spider-Man 3 is not a masterpiece, okay? But I do think it is overhated. I do think it is really good. Again, the action sequences in this film are incredible. People don't give it enough credit for that. The big thing about this movie was how they ruined Venom. And I do agree. I still don't think we've had a good Venom movie since, but that's a whole other thing. However, I think everything else involving the symbiote suit and the black suit Spider-Man and all that stuff, I think works pretty well. I think it's a great character study, you know, because we're dealing with the themes of redemption, and we're dealing with the themes of forgiveness, you know, and all of Peter's relationships are frayed in this film, and it's kind of like accepting mistakes and accepting faults. And so there's a story here. Same thing with like the Sandman. Even though I don't love the Sandman character, you know, that those are the themes that Sam Raimi was trying to put in this movie, and I appreciate it for that. Like, I respect it for that, even if I don't particularly think that it worked. But I think that it's good enough. I think it's a decent movie. I'm going to put it in the top of the decent category, because I can't deny the faults. I can't deny how bad Venom was. I can't, you know, defend the dance scene. I can't defend it as a great movie, but it's a decent movie, and I do think it is overhated. But after that, you saw a definite shift in Sam Raimi. After doing the 3 Spider-Man movies, a decade of Spider-Man, a decade of big budget action superhero summer movies, after that was done, he decided to go back to his roots and do a horror movie again. And that is where he came with Drag Me to Hell, which is not an Evil Dead movie, but it damn sure feels like one. It's got the same energy, the same intensity, the same wacky sort of like slapstick humor thrown in with the horror stuff. It's very Evil Dead 2. Like, the tone of this movie is absolutely Evil Dead 2. The lead actress is great. I forget her name, but she's so fantastic. She has to get like maggots thrown in her face, and she has to get buried in the dirt. She has to like do all these. She has to have an old lady like throwing up on her and stuff. Like, she's got to deal with so much shit in this movie. But this was, especially at the time it came out, such a breath of fresh air. I love being able to see Sam Raimi kind of go back to his horror roots and do something where he didn't have to abide by a ton of studio rules, and he just did something batshit crazy once again. And it was so nice to see that he still had it in him, and I think it worked pretty well for what it was. I really enjoyed this movie. I'm going to say that this one is... Man, I'm going to say that this one's pretty great, but I like it more than Quick and the Dead, more than Darkman. Yeah, I'm going to put it there. That's where I'm going to put that one. So Drag Me to Hell, I think, is really, really good. You got to be really into the Sam Raimi style, though. Like, it's it's not going to be a straight up like terrifying horror movie. Like it's wacky as shit, but it's fun. Okay, so only 2 more, which is kind of crazy. So after this, he did that movie Oz the Great and Powerful, which is essentially an origin story for the Wizard of Oz and an origin story for the Wicked Witch of the West. And I love the original Wizard of Oz. You know, I think it's a classic, but I've never really been a fan of any of the other movies or, you know, musicals or anything else they've done. It's just like the first movie is just pretty iconic for what it is. I didn't think this movie was that bad, though. I know a lot of people hated it when it came out, and it's not the best. It does have a little bit too much CGI. The storyline is a bit predictable, but I thought it was at least entertaining. You know what I mean? Like, I don't think it's great, but I thought it was entertaining for what it was. Again, I've only seen it once when it came out in theaters. I haven't really had the desire to go back and watch it again. I don't know how big of a fan Sam Raimi was of Wizard of Oz before this, but I'm assuming he probably loved the original series. So I'm going to put it in decent, but a little bit low decent. Low decent. I thought it was okay. Again, it's one of those movies that I don't think deserves the level of hate that it gets. And speaking of that, let's get into this. Okay. So I don't know if it was because of the backlash of his last few movies that he made, but after Oz the Great and Powerful, Sam Raimi did not make another movie for like 9 years, like almost a decade, okay? And then he finally came back when he teamed up with the MCU and he directed Doctor Strange and the Multiverse of Madness. And here's what I have to say about this. I think this movie kicked ass, okay? Like, listen, I agree. The MCU is not in a good spot right now. Most of the MCU movies after Endgame, I don't even like. And some of them I haven't even seen because I know that I'm not going to like them. But I think Multiverse of Madness is severely underrated for so many reasons. Because Sam Raimi didn't make a traditional MCU movie. He made a Sam Raimi movie, and it pissed people off. People didn't like the style. They didn't like the camera work. They didn't like the transitions. But the biggest thing that people didn't like is because they expected the movie to be something that it wasn't going to be. And maybe part of that's the marketing. Maybe part of that is the fault of the MCU in itself. But a lot of people wanted this to be a big going to different multiverses and meeting characters from other movies and having a bunch of cameos and having a bunch of characters. Like, all the theories of what the movie was going to be was like, oh, this version of Iron Man is going to show up and this version of Captain America is going to show up and this and that. And that's not what this movie is. And so maybe it should have been called something else. Maybe it should have been marketed as something else. But what this movie is one character dealing with her grief, going into her own darkness, into insanity, and Doctor Strange himself kind of dealing with this in his own way, but having to kind of put the reins on this character that is going to massively overpower him and puts him into an underdog position, which is great because Doctor Strange is so powerful within himself, being able to see him, in fear and be so frantic of another character. And Sam Raimi made the Scarlet Witch the fucking Terminator in this movie. Like, she reminds me of the character from Elven Lied that just goes around and blows a bunch of people's faces up. Like, Elizabeth Olsen in this movie is fucking terrifying. Like, she turns into this demonic creature, basically, in order to try to accomplish her goals. And I love, where she's like crawling out of the mirror and shit. And I love when she goes up against the Illuminati or whatever they are. I know people hate that scene because, oh, why'd you build these characters up just to kill them off so quickly? But I thought that was fucking hilarious. Like, I thought that was great. She just goes in there and wreaks havoc. Like, fuck, Mr. Fantastic, fuck you. Blows him up. Like, I thought all of that was great. Like, the character that speaks and he can, like, kill you in an instant. She just, like, fuses his mouth shut. She's just like, what mouth? And it's just, his head explodes. I'm sorry. I thought turning her into the Terminator was fantastic. Also, the ending where, like, Doctor Strange has to possess his dead corpse from another universe, basically turning him into a zombie character in order to fight the final battle. Dude, that's just cool fucking comic book shit that you don't see every day. Like, you're not going to see Captain America possess his dead corpse and become a zombie for the final fight. But you could see that in a movie like Doctor Strange. Anyways, I digress. I think Doctor Strange is a really good movie. It's actually one of my favorite MCU movies, and I don't care what people say about it. Yeah, I even said this when it first came out. You can go watch my review of it a few years ago when it first came out. I think this movie is a ton of fun, but it's if you enjoy it for what it is and not for the disappointment of what you thought it was going to be. Also, if you like Sam Raimi's style of filmmaking, that is all over this movie, which I'm more of a Sam Raimi fan than I am an MCU fan. And so the blend to me worked very well. Again, I know a lot of people hate this movie. I know a lot of people don't like it. I know I'm in the minority on it, but I think this movie's great. I'm going to put it above Darkman. Yeah, I'm going to put it above Darkman. Yeah, fuck you guys. It's my list. I don't care. I know I'm going to get hate for it. I know the comments are going to be like, what the, like, you put Multiverse of Madness above Spider-Man 3? Look, I know. All right. I know. And I'm sorry, but I got to be honest with myself. Maybe I'll rewatch it again and I won't think it's as good as it was before, but I thought the movie was badass. I'm sorry. Anyways, guys, there you have it. That is my ranking of every single Sam Raimi movie. I'm sure there will be many opinions to be had, so let me know your thoughts down in the comments below. Also, you can leave your ranking of his films if you want, or just put your top 5 or your top 10 or whatever you guys want to do. I'm really curious to see what he does next. You know, I don't necessarily think he should stay in like the superhero stuff because I feel like every time he's tried after Spider-Man 2, it's just kind of a little bit too controversial and people just don't dig it. So maybe he should try something different, or maybe he should go back to horror once again. I don't know. Make Evil Dead 4. I don't know what he should do. But regardless, he is a filmmaker that I definitely enjoy the majority of his films, as you can see. And I've always been a big supporter of him. And Evil Dead, like I said, is my favorite horror franchise. So, you know, I got a lot of love for him. The Spider-Man films, obviously, you know, I grew up loving as well. And he's got a lot of other hidden gems in there too, like Simple Plan, Drag Me to Hell, Darkman. You know, all of those are great as well. So let me know what you guys think in the comments below. Also, leave another director or filmmaker if you would like to see me do another tier list. Curious to kind of see what other filmmakers you guys would like to see me cover. But other than that, guys, thanks for watching this video. Please give it a thumbs up and a comment to help it in the algorithm. And if you want to support the channel on a deeper level, I do have links to my Patreon, channel memberships, merch store, and all the various social media links where you can follow me down below. Thanks for watching, guys.